Denny Carter is a writer and podcaster for NBC Sports Rotoworld, and he co-hosts the Living the Stream podcast. He's a Wii golf pro, he's got one of the best heads of hair in the fantasy space, and he's never been owned online. These are his late round perspectives. I'm really excited about this because this is the first time after years and years of talking to one another that we're able to podcast together.
That's right. This is a first. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm very excited. For those of you who don't know, for the record, Denny and I have another podcast, Living the Stream, that we just finished episode 269 of.
Nice.
For Living the Stream. And I thought I'd have him on Late Round Perspectives. You have been one of the guests that folks have talked up the most to come on Late Round Perspectives, because we have a certain dynamic on Living the Stream where, you know, I'm kind of guiding the conversation a little bit, and you know, we're giving our it's sort of the same flow each week, whereas Late Round Perspectives is much more a Denny driven show, right?
Free flowing. You say what you want.
Yeah, right. And this, you know, the show is more about you, Denny. I want to learn more about you. I feel like I know a good bit about you, but I want folks to learn more about you. And I want to hear some takes because, you know, we talk to each other all the time about fantasy football. We DM each other, we text each other, all that good stuff. But I you know, there's still some things that I don't know how you feel about. And I would love for this show to sort of be that arena for you to spew those takes.
I'm all for it. I will say I do feel overly exposed online after all these years. So we'll see if folks know everything about me or if there's still some things left to learn.
Yeah, I mean, of all of the fantasy analysts, I feel like you're probably in the 98th percentile in terms of what's out there about
right.
you. You know, you're not really hiding anything.
Not hiding
but I want to start things off by talking about your sort of journey in this space and becoming a fantasy football analyst and all that good stuff. You and I started at a really similar time. It was like back in that 2011, 2012 period. And I remember distinctly the reason why I found you, because I believe I found you before you found me.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to just say that's my win
okay, sure.
between the two of us. But I believe the reason I found you was you were at that fantasy football convention or some sort of conference that was in like New Jersey or something.
Yes,
was it in Jersey?
Right.
Is that what it was?
It was.
And like Michael Vick was there, I think. Yeah. And you were treating it as a sort of reporter, you know, being there. And then from there, you know, I remember DMing you, and you and I seemed to just like kick it off, you know, via DMs and such. And then we just ended up starting Living the Stream. I was like, hey, I want to do a podcast. You want to do a podcast with me? But we've been around for a while is what I'm saying. I mean, our first Living the Stream episode was when your son Xavier was born. Yeah. And he's now what, 10, 11?
He's actually 22. He's in his third year of college. He's 10. Yeah.
Right. And so look, we've been around for a while, but I want to ask you, what do you think has changed the most through the years? I'm not just saying with fantasy football analysis, but also sort of the way that consumers are playing the game and people are playing the game.
I have not thought about that New Jersey convention forever. Thank you for mentioning that. That you want to talk about a dopamine hit. That was a dopamine hit because I was virtually unknown, unfollowed on Twitter coming into that. I started tweeting about it, and Rumford Johnny and you and Evan Silva and Chris Wessling. They all started retweeting me, and I'm like, oh my God, it's happening. So that was very cool. And yeah, I was a reporter coming into this thing. Anyway, to address your question, what has changed? I mean, everything has changed because people who have gotten into fantasy football in maybe the last like 5 to 7 years, you have no idea what the Stone Ages were like. Okay. And by Stone Ages, I'm not talking about the 90s or the 80s or whatever. I'm talking about 2011. Okay. Where 2011, we still were not even talking about target shares. We were talking about targets, raw targets as the ultimate measure of a guy's opportunity. And we didn't know any better. Like that was just it. Like, oh, this guy saw 11 targets and this guy saw 8. So the 11 is better. And, you know, not incorporating what share the targets. Anyway, that's just an example of how savvy things have gotten over the years, or I guess how backward our analysis was back then. But also, there were very few numbers to work with back
Yeah.
then. There weren't these huge databases of all these various numbers. I mean, I would have had a stroke if you had told me, "Hey, what's the guy's rush yards over expected after contact?" I would have just stroked out. So,
Right.
I
Right.
mean, yeah, it's changed completely.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I look back at my original ebook, The Late Round Quarterback, that helped me start my career and all that good stuff. I look back at that, and the analysis in it, the writing in it, of course, horrible, horrible. Like, I don't want any human being on this earth to open up that ebook. Hopefully, no one has it anymore because it was, a decade ago. I don't want anyone to open that up and read it because the analysis in it is horrible. And now I don't say that from the perspective of, that's bad or that like I'm upset about that. I think it should, if my analysis hadn't changed through the years, that would be a very, very bad thing. I think that everyone should look back 10 years ago at what you were doing in work in any field and feel the same way to some degree. But with fantasy football and with this analysis and the things that we're doing, like you said, there's just so much more out there for us to uncover. And it's this sort of like exponential effect of not only are there more resources that are out there, but there's a lot of good work that's been done that everyone's just building off of, right?
Yes,
Where
right.
we had like a lot of stuff going on at Rotoviz back in the mid 2010s where a lot of new ideas were thrown out there that people have built off of, a lot more game theory stuff. And so I think that it's just this like combination of not just more accessible data, which is absolutely true, but also, people just doing really good work that then we're able to build off of and discover new metrics.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I build off of people's work all the time, even still, where I'll read something that sparks my interest, that piques my interest, you might say. And I'll say, well, like, let's go down this rabbit hole and see what I can find. And it's important as an analyst, it's important to credit the person who started talking about this at some point. And I know you do that as well. But yeah, I mean, so in that way, we are a community. It's not the same community, I will say, because it used to be back in 2011, 2012, 2013. It was a war for attention online. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we were desperately trying to claw our way up to the top of that mountain. And so we approached it in totally different ways. Today, there's not that kind of discourse on X or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think some of it might just be our exposure to what we're seeing, within the fantasy space and amongst analysts and all that stuff. But at the same time, back then, and I know that we sound like old men right now that are just complaining about or reminiscing about what happened, when we first started and all that good stuff. But back then, the industry, I don't think was seen as big as it actually is, right? Back then, there were not full-time jobs readily available. I'm not saying that they're readily available now, but there are more now. Obviously, there's more competition now too, but I think there's more opportunity in general. Whereas back then, you could count the number of full-time fantasy football analysts on one hand, essentially.
It was a huge deal when someone landed a job in the industry, a full-time job like that with like good pay and benefits. You were like, wait, what? That can happen? And today it's just another day when that happens.
Yeah, there's just content sites everywhere where, you can say that they're not the best jobs in the world all the time, but there's at least more opportunity out there for people to do this for a living. Speaking of backgrounds and jobs, you do have a background sort of as a journalist and you got your degree in journalism. How have you used that? Obviously you used it to take advantage early on in your fantasy football career, going to this conference that you totally forgot about. But how have you used it even today with your job at NBC Sports and at Rotoworld?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've actually had like a journalism job. I was an editor, I was a reporter over the years for about 12 years. But I do think that is ingrained in me in the way I approach things. I was very into using data even back then in my journalistic endeavors, whatever they were. Like when I worked at the Gazette newspaper in Prince George's County, Maryland. Okay, that was my first job out of college. They literally paid us in peanuts, but I loved it. I may or may not have lived in the basement underneath my mom and dad's house. It was the best price I could find.
That hasn't changed though.
No, right. I still live in mom's basement. Right. I after the show, I'm going to scream for my meatloaf from upstairs. But yeah, so even back then, I would say, here's a data dump that the county school system did. I'm going to sift through this and see what I can see. And if there's a story in here, I want to write about it. And very often, that would produce some of the best stories that I think that I wrote over the years. So I still tend to do that. I still tend to take that approach. But I also think the writing aspect, I'm not going to sit here and pat myself on the back, but I like to think of myself as a decent writer. I think I bring that to fantasy football and try to make it interesting in a way that is sometimes difficult because and you know this as someone who's constantly writing, it's hard to take these numbers and these facts and figures and make them interesting and use colorful language, but not overly colorful. You don't want to be cheesy, you don't want to be over the top with it, but to make it an enjoyable read and informational, that's hard. But I like to think I can do it okay.
Yeah, no, I've learned so much from you through the years of how to write in a more conversational way, a more attractive way, not a robotic way, because it's so easy at the end of the day to sound like a robot when you're putting this stuff together, because it is robotic in a way. Like, it's the same stuff that we're sifting through every single week, and you got to add a little flavor to that. And it's kind of tough. You're going to see similar sentence structures. You're going to see a similar way of phrasing things, and you gotta kind of fluff that up and make it a little bit more entertaining. And that's not easy to do. And I think that you do it better than anyone else in the space.
Oh, thanks, man.
So speaking of your job now, you're at Rotoworld. You've been there for, how long have you been there now? A few years? 3 years?
2020.
Yeah. Okay. So it's been about 3 years.
Yeah.
Rotoworld's known for player news, for blurbing. That's like the spot that people go to for their news for their fantasy players and such. How has your job sort of changed the way that you approach fantasy football analysis? From my perspective, and I keep throwing the word perspective out there. That's a very, very apt for the title of this podcast. Yeah. From my perspective, though, I do think that you have approached the game a little bit differently, and the way that your analysis is and what you bring to the table. But I want it from your mouth. How has your game as an analyst changed as a result of your job?
Man, I saw this question on the show sheet, and I thought about it for a while. I think the best part is that I'm not so bogged down, or I would say the most noticeable part, I'm not so bogged down by like the analytics. And I tried working with the news, like understanding how coaches think and talk and act, and how players talk and act. Like that does affect the way that you see a certain matchup or a guy's prospects for the season, right? And you get a feel. It's hard to explain. It's not quantifiable, but you do get a better feel, I think, for players, for certain draft strategies that you wouldn't have if you were not like up to your eyeballs in news all day, which I am.
Yeah, I think that the Rotoworld tree in general has allowed some folks to really be better than other analysts at sifting through the news and understanding the news. I think Adam Levitan's a perfect example of that, where he's just very, very good at being on top of what's going on around the league and digesting that in an actionable way that others aren't able to do that. He's better than me at doing that. And
he's so good. I'm jealous. I mean, he doesn't even, he hasn't worked for Rotoworld for years, and he's still is first with these blurbs on his Twitter feed. It's amazing.
Right, exactly. And so I do think, though, doing Living the Stream with you, I do think that you've brought a different angle that we didn't really have on the show for a handful of years, of just being so on top of what's going on around the league, because that's quite literally your job, to be on top. I know it's my job too, to some degree, but it's easy to, there's so much information every week, right? As an analyst that you're trying to digest and look at and analyze, that of course there's going to be a random blurb about Trey McBride that we miss, right? It's just not possible to digest all of it. But I do think that you've really brought that extra oomph to the analysis and to our other podcasts, of course. And it's been really, really beneficial and helpful. So the Rotoworld spectrum and the folks that are coming from NBC Sports and doing the fantasy analysis there, I do think that they bring, just from being there and from working there, I think they bring a certain edge, no pun intended, a certain edge to the fantasy space that might not be seen from other analysts.
And you know what? There are a lot of news grinders on my feed who are I feel like they're grinding blurbs by another name. So
Yeah, right.
there are a lot of people going through athletic articles, a lot of people going through ESPN articles, finding little tidbits, little quotes. I mean, the people are on it. Okay,
Yeah.
like so. I'm not gonna lie. Like I do my news shifts. I'm looking for news. Sometimes I'll just I'll go on Twitter. Oh, hey, this guy
Yeah.
this guy just tweeted something that I need to blurb about. So people are all over it, and you really can learn a lot. I'll give you one example. Like the Jets recently lost one of their run stuffers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wouldn't have known that, like just naturally. Like I'm not like doing that sort of research just on my own. So I did that for news, and it turns out the Jets are way worse against the run without this guy. I can't even think of his name right now, but way worse against the run without this guy, and that's good to know. It's something to file away.
Right, exactly. And for the record, I think that people might think that you guys are simply looking at Twitter, looking at X, and finding what beat writers are tweeting, and you're putting that into a blurb. But I would ask anyone who's gone to Rotoworld and such, when you're reading blurbs, look at the source. You can see where they're pulling these things from, and they're from different newspapers across the internet. They're from The Athletic and from beat reporters from The Athletic. You guys are reading through a lot of stuff in order to get the end blurb that everyone sees.
Exactly. Yes, that's right. And sometimes it'll be an incomplete report on Twitter or X, so you have to go find something else to support it. Yeah, so that can be tough. But the best, JJ, the best is when you find something deep in an article, like when you have like tortured yourself with reading 1,200 words on the Steelers running game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then at the very bottom, there's something blurbable, and you're like, hell yes, I did it. I found found the thing. It's like digging for gold, and you find one little gold nugget, and you say, Najee Harris is still bad.
And by the way, for the record, as I say on this show each week, we're recording this before the Thursday night game, before, fingers crossed for anyone who has Najee Harris, before he goes ballistic against the Tennessee defense, which I say that, and I immediately regretted saying that because it's more than likely not going to happen.
I mean, is ballistic? What, ballistic 40 yards and 2 touchdowns?
40 yards and 2 touchdowns and maybe 3 targets for Najee tonight would be him going ballistic. Yeah. Let's talk about some things going on across the league, Denny. The Raiders are down bad, man. They fired Josh McDaniels. They even, Davante Adams, they can't get him to produce. Is there any hope in your eyes for Davante Adams to produce rest of season? And I'm going to go after this. I'm going to go through some wide receivers. I'm going to ask you if you would take wide receiver X or Davante Adams to give people an idea of where you're at.
Yeah. So my initial thought on this was, can it get worse than it was last week against Detroit? And I don't know if it can. There's also the thing where I know it's a very small sample, but Adams was like a target dominator with Aiden O'Connell under center last time he played in week 4. And Jacoby Myers was basically like not part of the passing attack. With Garoppolo, I feel like the Garoppolo, Jacoby, McDaniels triumvirate, Patriots triumvirate was annoying at best for Davante Adams and disastrous really at worst for him. And he just wasn't part of the party, like he wasn't invited. Like we know you're a generational receiver, you're a Hall of Famer, but you can stay over here. You were not part of the Patriots. We all were. So we're going to do our thing. Now that's gone. Okay. McDaniels is gone, even though he's going to be paid for the next 4 years, which is just tremendous.
Good for him. Good for Josh McDaniels.
A worker's victory with Josh McDaniels getting fired. I hate myself for saying that, but and then you have Garoppolo probably done for the year. So I think Adams will be okay. He was in my regression files piece this week. I just can't get worse.
Okay, so let me ask you some wide receivers and see if you would take one of these wide receivers or Davante Adams. Okay, you ready? DK Metcalf or Davante Adams?
Metcalf.
Okay, Justin Jefferson, who it sounds like he's going to come back. This isn't like I'm going to shut you down for the rest of the season kind of deal. Justin Jefferson or Davante Adams. This is a little bit more difficult because obviously the injury is at play.
It is. I guess I'll go Adams because I'm just skeptical on Jeff. I think they're going to be very careful with Jefferson.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally fair. Chris Olave or Davante Adams, who obviously Olave too. I know you do the regression stuff. Chris Olave is a massive regression candidate. So would you rather have Chris Olave or Devontae Adams right now?
Every week. I mean, Chris Olave is costing people their families. Adams.
Adam Thielen or Devontae Adams?
Oh, Adams.
I'm going to assume then you're going to go Adams over DJ Moore, Christian Kirk, and Calvin Ridley.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I would assume that. Let me just ask you straight up, like Christian Kirk or Calvin Ridley. You're going Christian Kirk still rest of season over Ridley?
Yes, because Ridley's just not seeing any of those targets that can like smooth over those volatile performances. So it's like all or nothing with this guy.
Yeah. It's a lot more stability with Christian Kirk at this point.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Kenneth Walker. We saw him lose some snaps to Zach Charbonnet last week. And this is another reason why you guys provide such a great service to fantasy managers, is because I think a lot of people would look at that snap share between Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker, where Charbonnet played more than Kenneth Walker did last week. Yeah. Walker had 3 more rush attempts, but Charbonnet was on the field more. People would look at that and say, oh, Kenneth Walker was on the injury report last week. He had that calf injury. Maybe that's the reason why, or just conclude that that's the reason why Charbonnet played in front of him. And I do think that might play a role to some degree, but Pete Carroll said a lot of positive things about Charbs after that game. He was talking about how he's good at pass protection, how they wanted to get him involved more. Like this was an active thing that they tried to do. What's your read on this situation? Do you think it was the calf injury? Do you think it's just them wanting to get him involved? Charbonnet's look good, so maybe this is just the start of something new in that Seattle backfield.
Yeah, right. And I would say, first of all, Pete Carroll doesn't care about anything. Like it doesn't matter that Ken Walker was like the clear-cut lead back headed into last week. I do think that the Seahawks generally like to reward good play with more play. Mm-hmm. And Charbonnet was really good on his first, I think it was 4 touches last week. I think it was 3 carries and a reception, where he was bulldozing people and making, creating a lot of yards after contact. And I think that they were okay, let's just go with the kid. Let's go with the hot hand right now. And then he ended up running. I was actually just looking it up. Walker only had an 18% route rate. Charbonnet had a 53%. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a major problem for Walker. If that sticks, forget the rushing, I don't know, but if that sticks, that's a huge issue for Walker going forward. So I think Walker gets dinged here. Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I mean, I've taken an L on the way that I viewed this backfield entering the season, because it's been half the season is over and Kenneth Walker's been an RB1, right? So I definitely kind of looked at this situation incorrectly to start the year, because I liked Zach Charbonnet as a prospect, and I thought logically he did a lot of things that Kenneth Walker couldn't do, so they're going to use him and Walker sort of in tandem. And so I drafted more Charbonnet than Kenneth Walker this year. I wasn't fading Walker or anything, but I just like Charbonnet at his value a little bit more. This is kind of what I thought was going to happen. What was more along the lines of what we saw in week 8. With that being said, I think that this organization, and as you mentioned with Pete Carroll, there's so much volatility to the way this coaching staff handles these kinds of situations, that I think that it can go in a lot of different directions. So to me, would you say that Kenneth Walker's this clear-cut sell candidate as a result of last week, or are you more of this could possibly be the way that they kind of divvy things up, maybe favoring Walker a little bit more moving forward, and chances are he's still not a full-blown sell, because it's still they could still go back to how they were using him before.
I think it's definitely, I'm going to use a cop-out term that we always use in the industry. It's in the range of outcomes that Walker just gets back to his normal role. Okay.
Yeah.
But it is, I do believe that it is. The thing about about trading away Walker right now is that your league mates know what happened last week. Mm-hmm. Maybe they don't know about the route running splits or whatever. That's another thing. That's a layer deeper. But they know that Charbonnet made kind of a mess of this backfield last week. So you probably can't get. I don't think you can get a whole lot for Walker at the moment. So I would be hesitant to trade him away.
Let's say that we would trade him away if you could get a pre-week 8 price tag. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I would very much consider that. Yeah.
So what we're both saying basically is that Charbonnet is probably going to see some role moving forward, a bigger role than what he had before, but it doesn't mean that Kenneth Walker becomes obsolete in the offense.
No, I don't think, and I think he'll probably be more of a boom bust guy because he breaks off the long runs and whatnot.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't get those long runs, then and he doesn't get the pass catching work, then we're talking a bad spot.
Yeah. Another backfield that's sort of muddied right now because of what we saw with Jahmyr Gibbs when David Montgomery's been sidelined over the last couple of weeks is that Detroit Lions backfield. Gibbs has looked great over the last couple of weeks. Monday night, he looked amazing, right? Yeah. Like this is exactly what we dreamed of from a fantasy asset when they drafted him, 12th overall back during the draft. And so you have David Montgomery. They're on bye right now. They're on bye this week. So they're playing Xbox right now. They're hanging out. That's probably what they do during buys.
I mean, right.
And so, right. And so maybe the new Super Mario game, which is great, by the way. I'm not even getting sponsored by Nintendo, but man, that new Mario game is fun.
Yeah. What is it? What is this new game?
Yeah, just check. It's just a new Super Mario Brothers game, and it's a side scrolling, like the historical ones, the ones back in the day. And it's just got a little bit more to it because you can put more in games these days. I know that you haven't played video games since 1989. But
yeah, that's actually true, except for Wii Golf, of course.
Yeah, of course. Anyway, this Detroit backfield. You got Jahmyr Gibbs playing really, really well. You got David Montgomery obviously destroying before he went down with that injury. What's going to happen in this backfield? Are you buying both? Are you buying only Gibbs? Are you buying Montgomery? What the heck is going on? Because Montgomery sounds like he's going to be back after the bye this week.
He's going to be back. I have trouble thinking that Dan Campbell will go as far as saying like Montgomery's back. He's our guy. If he can't do it, no one can. That sort of thing. No, I mean, I don't think that he is going to go back to exactly the way it was before the Montgomery rib injury. But I do think that Gibbs will go back to like a 1B sort of role. It's just the way that they view him. I'm not comparing him to Jamal Charles, the greatest running back of all time, but I am saying that this happens with like smaller, explosive running backs where teams are just hesitant to give them a full workload. They just don't want to do that. And so you got to accept it. Now, I think both are startable. Both will be startable going forward. Hopefully Gibbs gets a lot of, pass catching work, and that would be cool. He can break off some long plays that way, but Montgomery coming back is he's not going to be holding the clipboard or anything.
Right. The way that I viewed it, and I talked about this on my mailbag episode, the way that I viewed it, or currently view it, is that Montgomery, when he was active, Jahmyr Gibbs was seeing like a 25% running back rush share per game. And all the while he was seeing, a decent enough target share, but not super, super high. Without Montgomery, that target share has been over 20% per game. He's seeing a crazy amount of running back rushes. What I could see happening is Gibbs maybe going from 25% of the team's running back rushes to 35 to 40% of the team's running back rushes, right? And then instead of a 21% target share, maybe in that 13 to 15% range, which if you're seeing a 13% target share per game in a good offense, like Jahmyr Gibbs would hypothetically be seeing, and you're getting 35% of the team's running back rushes, which would equate to, I don't know, maybe like 8 or 9 rushes a game, maybe 10 in good positive game scripts. That's definitely going to be usable, especially in PPR formats, like you're saying. And then the other piece of this I just want to throw out there, they have one of the cakiest schedules for running backs moving forward. So that, in addition, could really help both these guys be fantasy relevant at the same time.
Hey, Detroit wants to be run heavy. Like let's just acknowledge that. Like they don't want to be balanced. They want to be run heavy. They definitely don't want to be pass first. In 5 of 8 games, they've been below their expected drop back rate. They're 21st in pass rate over expected. So when they can establish the hell out of it, they're doing that. And, that could fuel the kind of volume that Gibbs would need, so that if Montgomery sees 15, 18 carries, Gibbs can still get maybe 10 carries and some targets and, can see what he can do with that.
Let me ask you this on the spot, both totally healthy. Who are you taking rest of season, Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery?
I mean, I know it sounds like a boomer answer, but I'd go with Montgomery because he's still going to get all the goal line work.
Yeah, I think that I'm leaning that way too, but I think it's a lot closer than it was, 2 weeks ago within that backfield. Let's move to another backfield. This is a newsy type thing, I feel like, is the Colts backfield, because Jonathan Taylor was destroying in the first half last week and then seemingly just didn't get used in the second half. Like, what's going on with that backfield? Do they just hate Jonathan Taylor despite bringing him back with his deal?
I actually covered that game for NBC, and I was perplexed, to say the least, because let me tell you, like, I studied the film. I looked at the analytics, and Taylor was on his way to 200 rushing yards.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, like that was going to happen if he got 20 carries. He was shredding the Saints. The only thing I can come up with, JJ, is that the Colts have him on a strict pitch count, and that's it. Like he has a certain number of either rushes or snaps, and they're going to Zach Moss. There's also the issue, though, that Zach Moss, as you know, has been really good.
I know. Yeah.
If he would falter a little bit, I think that could crack the door open for Taylor to take over as the 1A, but he hasn't. Zach Moss is doing really well, and in fact, he leads the entire league in rushing since week 2. So, it's tough.
Makes you question why the Colts decided to go this route when they had a legitimate running back on their team at the time.
I know, it does. It does make you wonder. I am wondering very strongly about why they didn't just roll with Zach Moss.
So do you think Jonathan Taylor is going to maintain sort of what we've seen over the last maybe couple of weeks? Maybe not like obviously when he first came back, but what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, or do you think that it'll still sort of start to favor him a little bit more down the stretch in that backfield?
Honestly, like, if it didn't happen last week, I struggle to see it happening going forward unless Moss gets banged up or really starts to struggle. But there's been no indication that Zach Moss, and I know it's been a long time since Zach Moss was good, but at one point Zach Moss was actually good. And then I think he suffered a concussion with the Bills. He really wasn't the same after that. He got banged up again with something else, lower body thing, and then Singletary took over. So I do think that it just might be the case where Moss is a good running back.
I didn't think he was that bad of a prospect. I remember when he came out, one of his comps for, I think a lot of people, but it was at least one of the comps. The way that I look at comps is I'm looking at multiple instead of just one, because I don't think one really helps you get a full picture about a player. If you have multiple comps that are all favorable, that's a really good sign for that prospect.
Right.
With Zach Moss, he had some bad ones, I think, but there was one was Kareem Hunt for Moss. And we're kind of seeing that kind of ceiling from Moss right now in this offense. And like you said, it's not easy to just dismiss that and say we're going to use Jonathan Taylor. Not only that, the Colts going to the playoffs and making noise in the playoffs, not likely, right? No. And so what would be the point for them to just drive Jonathan Taylor into the ground when this is not their win now season? This isn't the season where they're really going to go for it. I think it can help the offense. I'm not one of those believers. It's just like teams are just going to sit all their stars because they don't care about winning this year. They're professionals. They care about winning. The players want to play, all of that stuff. You can't, you really need to not overstate sort of that aspect of things. But at the same time, when you have a capable player like Zach Moss on that roster, I think it's going to limit Jonathan Taylor's ceiling to some degree rest of season. I still think Taylor can be like a high-end RB2 because the landscape is so rough. But at the same time, it's not the most cut and dry situation in the world because it's Jonathan Taylor, because he's supposed to just be good.
One more note on this Indy backfield. Last week, Taylor ran 53% of the routes and Moss only ran 22%. Mm-hmm. And, this is a Colts team that is going to be chasing points, more often than not, I think. And although they seem to want to be balanced or even run heavy, I don't think that they'll be able to do that. If that's the case, and Taylor takes on the primary pass catching role out of the backfield, could be good for him.
Yeah, which is something that we really haven't seen from Jonathan Taylor historically. He's always been like a 9-10% target share guy. And if he's going to be a 13-14% target share guy, that's really, really big news. And I said this on the Sleeper Show this week. Rich Rebar, our buddy, he sent tweets out earlier this week about how Colts games have been insane shootouts almost every single week.
Yes.
Just crazy. I mean, they have the second highest game total average this season behind only Miami. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Lots of plays, by the way. If you look
Yes.
at the plays that they're giving up and the number of plays they run on offense, it's like 70 plus every week.
Yeah. They're leading the league in total plays run per game, not just on their side, but the whole environment, both sides. It's a really, really good environment for scoring. And I think that combined with the Colts having such a poor, not the best defense in the world, means that Jonathan Taylor could see these negative game scripts. And that's where I think the value is going to come from more. And we have to remember, this goes back to the Jahmyr Gibbs stuff. Have to remember, targets are more valuable than rush attempts, a lot more valuable, especially PPR formats. You're talking like 2.5x in terms of value. So if Jonathan Taylor is seeing, a 55% route participation, that's very, very strong because we know that he can be really efficient on those targets and on those routes.
There you go. I think we cracked the case, JJ. We figured it out.
Yes. All right. Let's talk about quarterback. We talk about quarterbacks every week on Living the Stream, but we never talk about good quarterbacks. We always talk about very, very bad quarterbacks, like Baker Mayfield and Josh Dobbs and Taylor Heineke. Those are the kind of quarterbacks that we've talked about a lot through the years. So let's just talk about a good quarterback for once. Okay. Let's talk about Patrick Mahomes. Right now, Mahomes has 19.5 points per game. He's never been below 20.5 points per game since becoming starter in Kansas City. Denny, how concerned are you?
I'm kind of concerned. And, I think that the Chiefs defense being like either pretty good or sometimes elite this season has been a problem for fantasy purposes. Not just for Mahomes, but for everybody, I know Kelsey has some like nuclear performances that have single-handedly won your week. So I'm not saying anything about him really, but like as far as Mahomes and then like the secondary and tertiary options in this KC offense, like their prospects are dinged big time by the Chiefs being an actually good team. And sometimes if you look at the drop back rate over expected for the Chiefs, sometimes they're balanced. They're balanced. It's crazy. Like this is something we never saw. They were consistently like plus 12, plus 15, plus 20 sometimes. That's not happening as much this year. And so it's hurting. It's hurting Mahomes and everybody except for Kelsey.
Yeah, look, this is definitely skewed a little bit because of their Denver matchups. But KC, according to my adjusted fantasy points allowed numbers, I'm looking at it right now, KC has had the second easiest schedule at quarterback to start the season. And I also, what I do with these adjusted numbers is I'll often look at how well where these guys would rank if you adjust for schedule, right? So right now, if you look at the quarterback stuff, Buffalo as a team ranks first in quarterback scoring when you adjust for schedule. Number 2 is the Chargers for, Justin Herbert. Number 3 is the Eagles with Jalen Hurts. Kansas City, Denny, is 11th right now when you look at their schedules so far and how they've actually performed. And moving forward, KC has this is really good podcasting. They have the 27th best schedule for quarterbacks from now through the end of the year. In the short term, it's pretty good. Now, I earlier this season mentioned Mahomes as a buy because they went through a stretch, which they've kind of gone through, where they faced pretty easy matchups. And the problem is he hasn't really come through. Last week being one of the key ones where we all thought that he had a chance to go nuts. He didn't even throw a touchdown pass against Denver. And so I think that there's definitely a problem just in general from a fantasy perspective. I think Kansas City is set up well because the defense is playing well and, Mahomes is still Mahomes. And it's still Mahomes, so we know that, a ceiling is possible every single week with a player like that. I'm not calling him like the QB7 in fantasy football from here on out, but I do think that there should be some concern based on how he's performed with the schedule that he's seen.
I mean, I'm looking at pass fantasy points over expected right now, and Mahomes is not in the top 12.
Yeah.
So he has not been the efficient usual Mahomes. I mean, he's like in like the Lamar. Well, Lamar's in that area. Anthony Richardson, Justin Fields, like that area as far as passing expected points over expected or points over expected. Anyway, long story short, I think there is some reason to worry. Obviously, you have to start him every week, but if you drafted Mahomes, you're in a dark place, I think.
Yeah, this was the first week of the season that I had in my rest of season rankings. I had Lamar Jackson ahead of Patrick Mahomes rest of season. And I felt fine about it. It wasn't really that difficult of a choice after what we saw this past week. You look at the schedules, I talked about adjusting performance, and Baltimore's 5th right now in adjusted fantasy points scored at quarterback this season. So I don't think it's that crazy of a choice to say I would rather take the upside of Lamar Jackson in this offense than Patrick Mahomes in the way that he's been performing.
And Mahomes, by the way, is adding like an unusual number of rushing points because he's doing that dad run out of the pocket when no one's open, and no one's open because they have the worst receiving core in the entire league. Maybe
it's rough. Yeah,
I mean,
it's rough.
It's bad. Like Sky Moore, like shouldn't even be on the roster at this point. It's horrific. I
was just gonna say I've seen the analysis and the take. I know that like Next Gen Stats does like a target separation thing for wide receivers, but it's at the point of a target, so it'll say how far a wide receiver is from a defender at the point of a target, and the KC wide receivers from that perspective actually look okay. So before anyone comes at us and says they actually haven't been bad, you have to keep in mind that kind of data doesn't really tell the whole story at all. I mean, it's only when they're targeted, and a player like Patrick Mahomes, who's very, very good at football, is more than likely going to extend plays and such and find an open receiver. So if the receiver is open, they're going to look better within that kind of metric.
I mean, right. And what I'm saying about the rushing is that he's tacking on some unexpected rushing production. Like you didn't draft him for that reason. Right. And he's still a little bit disappointing. I mean, he's on pace for almost 500 rushing yards this year. Looks like he's usually around 300 just through his time in Kansas City. So that would be pretty big. It's just the passing game is not what we're used to.
Yeah. Denny, what are the vibes around Kyler Murray right now? That's been one that just seems like it kind of came out of nowhere, where they were just like, yeah, he's good. He's healthy now. We're going to activate him. And I mean, is he going to play this weekend? Like what? It sounds like Clayton Tune is probably going to be the guy, but is Kyler Murray going to see some action? Is he going to be someone that we're going to rely on in fantasy football down the stretch?
I think it's possible. Range of outcomes, JJ.
Yes, of course.
But Jonathan Gannon is all over the place with the quarterback thing, because like we talked about the other day, like Gannon comes out and says, no, Josh Dobbs is our starter for sure. And then like 15 minutes later, he's like, I've watched the tape and I'm benching Dobbs. And then they trade him 15 minutes after that. Yeah. That's just unnecessary. And then, okay, it's Clayton Tune's job. But Kyler looks great, looks explosive. He's ready to go. He's learning the offense, but he probably won't ever play, but he could play this week. Mm-hmm. And you're like, what's happening? And now that the trade deadline is come and gone, and there was some, scuttlebutt about Kyler being dealt, I do think that we're going to see him, probably not this week, but the following.
Yeah. I have some hesitation about him really letting loose and running, and that's really what we want from a player like Kyler. It's not like you have amazing weapons there. I'm hopeful that Michael Wilson can become something down the stretch in fantasy, and obviously Hollywood I think is a really underrated wide receiver, but it's kind of hard for me to think that he's going to be a top 5 quarterback in fantasy coming off this ACL.
I don't think so. I mean, look, I for some reason, I don't know why. I don't know if I told you this. I ended up with a lot of Kyler Murray on my best ball teams. So, I don't know. So
you're hoping. You're praying that he's able to.
I'm pretty hopeful. And on a lot of these teams, I lost Anthony Richardson. So we need you. We need you back, Kyler. We need you in a bad way. Top 5. I don't think that's happening.
Yeah. But I think, but QB, yeah, exactly. Top 10, like QB 6 to QB 10. I could see that happening. And in this landscape, I will take that all day, because it is not an easy quarterback landscape right now. So
no. Oh, it's horrible. Yeah. I mean, if you have a starting quarterback in like 14-team league, you're feeling pretty good.
Yeah. Just a lot going on at the position. All right, Denny, you do a lot of work with kickers, and I need to talk to you about kickers, because this might be the first time on in the late round podcast feed that I have talked about kickers. I get questions about kickers though throughout the season. And I give them a very brief process, but you're a kicker guy. You've been writing and analyzing kickers for years now. I'm the person who doesn't even know which kicker is on which team throughout the season, because I barely play in leagues with kickers these days. So Tell the people what kind of process they should be going through when selecting a kicker each week.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting the plight of the kicker analyst. First of all, I started this mostly as a bit, and then it just took off. And it turns out people were hungry. They were starving for
Yeah.
kicker content and analysis. So I got super into it. I did I ever tell you that I once had a podcast dedicated exclusively to kickers?
I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, it was a 25-minute podcast back in like 2014, and Russell Clay, who I
Yeah.
think you know from online, he hosted it, and I would just talk kickers. It was amazing.
What
Anyway,
was it called? Like, was there a name? Can anyone go back
oh,
and listen to it
I
now?
think it was called Kicking It, possibly.
Wow, what an awesome name for a kicker
Yeah.
show. Yeah.
Oh man, we would grind the data. Let me tell you. But yeah, I mean, but it's not like some huge secret. I don't have like a secret algorithm that I use every week. You want kickers who will be in positions where they will be able to kick field goals throughout the game. And what I mean by that is you don't want to get a guy on a team that's an underdog by 5 or 6 or 8 points or whatever, and whose team is probably going to be chasing points in the second half and foregoing field goal attempts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, we see that every week. A team has 4th and 2 from the 20, and they decided to go for it because they need points instead of going for the field goal. That's, and that's the sort of thing that crushes your upside with kickers, where they only get 2 quarters of actually being able to kick field goals. Anyway, you want kickers with positive or neutral game scripts, and also teams that are allowing a lot of pass yards tend to allow a lot of field goal opportunity. And all you want are attempts. Don't focus on the long kicks. Okay, I don't want to hear about this guy's kicking in Denver, so he can make that 60-yarder. That's a horrible process. That's the worst process ever. Don't worry about field goals, long field goals. You just want attempts, and so that's what we're looking for.
Do you care about how good the kicker actually is?
Uh, no, but only to an extent. Okay, like you get into like the 70 to 75% range of conversion, and that gets a little dicey. Okay, so I'm not gonna go out and like recommend a kicker who is only making like 70% of their kicks this season. It makes me hesitant on a guy like Blake Groupie from New Orleans. Okay,
Mm.
who I know you knew that guy existed.
I actually, the only reason I do is because I picked him up in a league this week, and now I'm a little bit scared. I'm not even joking. I know that people come to me and they're like, "You must know this answer because you have this really process-oriented, analytical podcast." And I'm telling all of you right now, I know absolutely nothing about kickers in the league. Nothing, absolutely nothing. I just know their names that I hear through the broadcast. I'm not even like associating the names with teams at this point. It's just they're so irrelevant in my brain. I'm sure they're great guys, but I'm not analyzing them.
Right. So he's at Groupie's making 80% of his kicks this year. So we have that going for us. He should be fine. But it does, I do get a little bit scared off at some point, but mostly no, I don't care. I don't care. And there are times when I'll recommend a kicker who makes only 2 of his 4 attempts, but the process.
Yeah. Look, if you're going, it's no different than going after targets, I'm assuming, and such,
That's
right?
right. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. All right, Denny, before I let you go, give me one buy candidate in fantasy football right now, and then also give me one sell candidate in fantasy football.
Okay. So this may be, a little bit of a cheap one, but, and I know you mentioned him on your 15 transactions podcast earlier this week. DK Metcalf he's just running cold. Like everything is super cold. Like all of the peripheral stuff is there. Okay. Like he's getting every opportunity you could want, all the air yards, all the targets, all the high value targets, like inside the 20, inside the 10. The Seahawks offense in general, I think is bound to regress in a good way, in a positive way, because they are elite on early downs. Like their EPA is up there with like Kansas City and the Bills. That it's 3rd and 4th down where they're really struggling, right? And if they can figure that out, and I think that they can, because they did last year. If they can figure that out, I think that Metcalf and others in that offense could really regress and be good buy candidates at the moment. I mean, as for like guys you wanna ditch like before they turn into pumpkins. I mean, I don't know. I Joe Mixon after his week last week, I don't think that continues. I know that he's the only game in town in the Cincinnati backfield, but like if you can get something for him, I think that you should do that this week before things you fall apart again, and they will because he's so inefficient. He's such an inefficient runner, as you know.
Is there a running back in fantasy football that's decent at getting fantasy points that's talked about less than Joe Mixon right now? Like I'm not saying that he's like an RB1. I'm just saying like he's getting fantasy points obviously because he's the only back that they're really using back there. But is there anyone like I have not seen a single article on Joe Mixon hit my feed or anyone talk about Joe Mixon in a year and a half.
The only time I've heard it is when I went on the fantasy football happy hour last week and I said, "Hey, Joe Mixon could be in a good spot against the Niners."
There you go.
And that was it. The mainstream media won't talk about it.
Yeah, it's very bizarre because he's obviously in an offense that's turning it up. I think that would be an interesting sell just because people might buy into that environment right now.
Right.
Because things are really going in the right direction for them.
Right. Yeah, I think that's another thing you have going. Like Burrow's healthy. Like this offense is humming. They've made the Niners look silly. So this is the only chance I think you're going to get, or the last chance I should say, to get something for Mixon if you can do that.
That's an interesting one for sure. Denny, it was great to finally do a podcast with you. Been wanting to do one for years and years now. Jokes aside, let everyone know where they can find you and find your work.
Yeah, at CD Carter 13 on the X machine. You can find all my work on NBC Sports /Rotoworld. I actually wrote a piece today on pass funnel and run funnel defenses and what that data could mean for Week 9. So check that out.
And I'm on Twitter, on X, at LateRoundQB. You can find all my work over on lateround.com. And as always, everyone, thanks for tuning in.